Well, again, everybody, this is Steve coming to you with another entry in my ongoing writing series, or Intro to Writing. Today's subject is balancing strengths and weaknesses, or is your character too OP? This is a big one when it comes to writing, because it goes back to my previous comments about believability of characters. Now, obviously, it's fantasy, it's fiction, it's not real life, but you still need to have the characters be believable. Now, there are situations where ridiculously OP is good, OP being overpowered. There are situations where that's good. A lot of times, that's in parody. Sometimes that type of situation is one where the character needs to be so overpowered that they are unconquerable, and and that's there for a reason. But in the vast majority of situations, something that is unconquerable is actually bad for the story. You want something that you can defeat, even if it takes every single thing you have as the hero. That's and if you think about it, even in mythology, the characters of Zeus and some of the others like that. Zeus, Apollo, Jupiter, the different gods like that, they were really strong, but then they had weaknesses. They had offsetting weaknesses. They had offsetting handicaps, if you will, that meant that they could be overcome. You had to have somebody of sufficient strength to overcome them, but they could be overcome. You look at the Titans in mythology. Big, nasty, brutish creatures, but I forget exactly who it was. I think it was Zeus or somebody that overcame them and imprisoned them. Couldn't destroy them, but he could imprison them. So he was strong enough to do that. But it took a bit of a fight to get where he would, where he needed to be to overcome them. And that just comes from, Earth mythology. One of the rules that I was taught early on in writing is for every strength, you need to have an offsetting weakness. And you want that offsetting weakness to be, not so insanely counter to the main power. You want it to be something that if used right and in sufficient quantities, it can overpower the strength. Now take a look at comic book heroes. You've got Superman. Superman has just ridiculous strength, and nobody even knows the limit of his strength because he keeps finding new. He keeps breaking limits and finding new heights to which his powers go. However, you walk in the room with a piece of kryptonite, and Superman's going to tap out on the floor real fast. You got like Batman, for example, going with other comic book superheroes. Batman, he's smart, he's creative, he's got a lot of weapons, but he's human, so he's limited. So he's got that there. Flash, one of his weaknesses is, partially his speed, ironically enough. Another of his weaknesses is the fact that due to his speed, he burns a lot of calories. So he can run out of energy pretty quickly if he's not careful. There's a anime series, and if you haven't heard about it by now, I'd be surprised. It's called One Piece. It's been going for so long that if people haven't heard about it, I'm a little surprised. Even those who don't do anime, they should have heard about it by now because it's such a big thing in Japan and spreading all over the world that way. But in that book, or in that series, not that book, but that series, which is based off of a manga, They have these superpowered characters called Devil's Fruit users. They have this magical fruit that they eat, and they gain these superpowers. Luffy is one of the strongest in that series, and he, obviously he's got the common weakness that all Devil's Fruit users have, which is you step into the ocean, you lose all your strength and your powers. So that's one quick way to stop them. There's another one where they have a metal, which if they touch you with that metal, you lose all your abilities and you just become this weak, slobbering blob on the ground. And different Devil's Fruits counter each other. So you've got that balancing effect where, like, you have Smoke and Fire. Those two are kind of balanced, but Smoker went up against Luffy and pretty much kicked his fanny. Crocodile was an interesting one because he had the sand ability. Luffy figured out if you take liquid and you use it against Crocodile, you can neutralize his power and stop him cold. So that's basically one example of balancing abilities or balancing strengths and weaknesses. And it's not and it doesn't necessarily have to be a case of that only the strengths need to be countered by weaknesses. You also need to go the other direction and counter weaknesses with strengths. So, like, let's say you have somebody who's blind. Well, okay, great. You also can have somebody who runs around with them who is their seeing eye dog. That's the counter to their weakness. And that's probably not a perfect example, but that is one example that they're blind, but they have this this animal that can speak and talk and is their seeing eye animal and leads them all over the place. So that counters their weakness. In going back to comic books, Daredevil's a great example of this. Totally blind, but he has got a hearing ability that gives him kind of this sonar-like ability and gives him artificial vision through his hearing. The other thing, too, is when it comes to balancing characters and balancing strengths and weaknesses, well, I should say when it comes to balancing strengths and weaknesses, balancing characters is an important thing, too. A good example of this from my own writing, and again, I like to use my own because I've already been through that. I've explored it. I've learned it, and it makes something that's easy for me to relay to you as here's what I did, and here's how I solved this little problem. As far as balancing characters go, if you look at the character of Phyland, when I built him, I knew he was going to need a balancing character because he was kind of extreme to the side of like the grumpy old man and the harsh politician, and of course consider the absolute clown show he has to work in. Like I say, you understand why he's always grumpy. And also he's kind of alone out there. It's just Sol is one planet within a wide galaxy. One planet, one tiny little parsec. And, basically when he goes up to Cebius, because Earth is a member of the United Galactic Worlds, partially for its protection, partially for the ready access it gives to all the other races within the galaxy. Because it basically helps to level the playing field. It takes the bigger players and kind of, I shouldn't say kneecaps them, but kind of ties their hands a little bit so that they're not out there throwing their weight around willy nilly. They're now kind of held in check. But then it takes the little guys and gives them more power, more of a voice, more of a place within the galaxy. It's kind of the idea, if you look at like the U.S. Congress, you have the House side of things, where they get representatives based on the number of people in their particular state. So bigger states have more power because they have more people in there who can vote. than the smaller states. However, you go into the Senate, and everybody has 2 representatives, period. Doesn't matter how big or small your state is. Everybody is represented equally. And the funny thing is, the Senate's actually more powerful than the House, even though there's more people in the House than there are in the Senate. So it's a balance of power. With Fyland, my balancing character was Finch. Finch was meant to be a filler character. That was his whole purpose. He was there to be a filler character and to be a balancing character for Fyland, because I realized if I didn't balance Fyland, I was going to end up with a mess. Thankfully, I did not, and I attribute that to Finch being in there. Because if you look at Finch, where Fyland is very brash and bold and outspoken and all that, Finch is very quiet. He's quiet. He's thoughtful. He is a strong friend to Fyland. He helps temper Fyland. He helps him to kind of mellow out in a sense. So he's the balancing character. What's hilarious is that Finch ended up becoming more popular than Fyland. I figured Fyland was going to be the main character, and Finch was going to be the kind of the filler character. And it ended up that Finch ended up being the bigger character than Fyland did. Fyland does more, but Finch was more popular. So you're going to get those. You're going to get characters that you don't think are worth anything. They're just there to serve a brief purpose or serve a small purpose, and then move on. And that was what Finch was there for. He was there to balance Fyland, and that was pretty much his role. And it ends up he takes on this whole other life, this whole other world. He becomes a crowd favorite. People, when I ask people, well, what did you like about this? What did you like about that? Almost without question, I hear people go, I love Finch. And the running joke with Finch is that he's kind of this little feathery Yoda. Not my words. That was how people described him. Is because he, like I say, he has kind of that Yoda feel to him, and that was not intentional. Believe me, that was not intentional. And I didn't really even think of him as being anything like that, because when I saw him, I was like, okay, he's going to be thoughtful. He's going to be intelligent, a good friend to Fyland, somebody who will temper Fyland, who will be the voice of reason to Fyland's frustration. And in doing so, I evidently ended up with my version of Yoda, I guess. I don't know. Like I say, that's how people describe him. So, now you look at Mike. You have Mike Clayton. His balancing character, which ended up, I had big plans for her anyway, so she didn't come up the same way as Finch did. But Mike's balancing character is Sarah, and which is kind of funny because that ends up going from a friendship and a kind of a yin yang relationship to a romantic relationship and then marriage. So that that doesn't start out with any, she's interested in him. She likes him. She's liked him since she first met him. But when it started out, she liked him from the sense of a specimen, an observation subject. So he was like basically her favorite observation subject. It wasn't until they had known each other for a while, and when I say a while, I'm talking like decades. Because you got to remember, for the Banoi, time passes very, very slowly. So for her, 50 years is like 5 days for us. So her relationship with Mike was basically speed dating, whereas in Mike it was taking it really slowly. That's kind of the fun part about those two. And I mentioned this in another video about basically that there's a running joke about who's actually robbing the cradle, because she's like 18,500 years old, but he's like, when they finally get married, but he's only like 120, 130. So, and of course that's 130 in human years. So, that to a Banoi, you're talking somebody, if it was like Banoi equivalency, you're talking somebody who's like 130,000 years old. So she's equivalent to a human 18-year-old, and he's equivalent to like this really old dude in the Benoi. So, but when you go in Benoi years, he's basically a newborn. So, like I say, there's kind of this running joke of who's actually robbing the cradle. But anyways, that being said, balancing characters also can be complementary. Going back to Earthfleet, take Lars and Vlad. Lars is a good spy. Vlad is too. But Vlad is more the technical side, whereas Lars is more the James Bond side of things. He's more the traditional spy. Vlad is kind of he's the tech support, if anything, because he's good at hacking, he's good at computers, he's the technical side of things. So where you have one person's strengths, which is, like what Lars has as far as the spying and all of that goes, then you have the balancing strength, or, the balancing individual who provides the things to Lars that Lars can't provide, and vice versa. And balancing weaknesses and strengths also is not necessarily just a character thing. If you look at, and they haven't really been featured that much, that's coming up eventually, is if you look at Dark Earth, they've got the Raven and the Wolfpack class. They are ship killers that are intentionally designed to be a dichotomy. Basically, one ship's strengths are the other ship's weaknesses, so the two of them function together in a pair, and they offset each other's weaknesses and complement each other's strengths, and it makes for a stronger end result than what you would get with each one by themselves. Now, they can operate separately, but they're best when they operate in pairs. The idea of that starship dichotomy actually comes from there's Sir Genius and the Samurai. And if you remember it from a previous video, Earthfleet built the Sir Genius class to kind of begin addressing a problem that they had, which is the constant shortage of personnel, which means they could not field a large fleet. And they're also, being that they're a small organization, they have, they have infinite resources in the sense of raw materials, but not infinite resources as far as production and other things. So what they needed to do was get the most bang for their buck, and that's where the ship killers came in at. You want a small ship with a small crew that's able to take on the big boys. Sir Genius and Samurai class is designed to take on ship killers. The Pegasus, which was the next iteration, was supposed to take on battleships. However, that project ended up failing, so that that need was not filled. Which, if you take enough Sir Genius and Samurai class, you can take on a battleship easily. You can take on a dreadnought if you want to, although you got to kind of do the fly swarm thing with a dreadnought to really do any decent damage with that. Like I say, they made the Sir Genius class. The Sir Genius class turned out to be just a godsend. It was exactly what the fleet needed. It was a perfect ship. Well, then it gets about 40, 50 years on, and they're like, okay, it's reaching the end of its useful life. Let's go ahead and make a new generation. So they build the Samurai class. And it didn't take them very long to realize that the Samurai class, which is 20% bigger and more powerful, because it is bigger and more powerful, it loses some of the advantages of the Sir Genius class. The Sir Genius class, despite being, well, I can't say 20% less because it's not exactly 25% less. I think I'll get 25% less if my math is right. Correct me if I'm wrong. But despite being weaker than the Samurai class, it is actually far more maneuverable. I mean, the Samurai class is more survivable because it's a heavier ship. It's a heavier, sturdier ship. But the Sir Genius is also a lot lighter on its feet. And it's kind of like the idea... if you look at soldiers in antiquity, you look at the Roman soldier versus the Greek hoplite. The Greek hoplite tended to be a lighter armed soldier, had lighter armor, they could move quicker, they were more agile on their feet. But the Roman was heavier armored and could take a greater beating. It's kind of like the idea of a dude running around in leather armor and a chainmail versus a guy running around in full plate armor. The guy in the plate armor can't move as fast, gets tired more easily, and so on and so forth. But the guy in the lighter chainmail armor is also more flexible, more maneuverable, more agile. So, like one has advantages in one area, one has advantages in the other. And they didn't create a perfect dichotomy because they couldn't solve each other's weaknesses completely. But that kind of introduced the idea of ship killers with, two sides, basically two separate ship killers becoming two sides of the same coin with each one's strengths offsetting the other one's weaknesses, which is where you get the Raven and the Wolfpack from. Because by that point in time, you see Earthfleet going back to the original Sir Genius idea. Light and fast, but powerful. High maneuverability. And they took basically everything that they learned from Sir Genius, from Samurai, and from Pegasus, and implemented it into the Raven and Wolfpack classes. The Raven and Wolfpack is an interesting ships, too, because they still carry the 9-man crew. However, the ships are also very heavily automated, so if push comes to shove and you lose most of your crew, as long as you've still got one person that can run the engineering console, that ship can still fight even if you lose the other 8 members of your crew. Sir Genius, not so much. Sir Genius and Samurai, you can do that, but there's so much that you have to do to run that ship. You really need all 9 crew members on a red alert situation. With Raven and Wolfpack, you don't. So long as the automation and the AIs continue functioning, that ship can run with just 1 crew member. So, which, like I say, is an advantage for them. Let me see. Now, going back to the idea of characters being too overpowered. Knights fighting huge mountain-sized dragons. That's a little too OP. That stuff like that. But if there's a way to defeat a dragon in a situation like that, even though the dragon is that ridiculously OP, that's a good one. Now, like I say, there are situations where you want them to be ridiculously OP and seemingly unstoppable. Now I'm trying to remember where I was going to go with that. I circled back to it and then I lost my thought. Okay. Okay, let me just start that thought over again, see if I can remember where I was going with that. But yeah, let's say you have a knight and you have a dragon. And the dragon is able to just, they're chaos level, or a chaos level dragon. Basically, these dudes can wipe out entire continents and not bat an eye because there's just nobody powerful enough to take them on. However, with that dragon, one of the offsetting things that might be possible is somebody has a magic spell that creates an infection. For example, I'm just there's better ways to do this. I'm just thinking of an example off the top of my head. You got this chaos level dragon that's like breathing fire on castles, and the castles are turning into little bubbling piles of molten goo. Nothing can stop him. He's just wiping out entire armies. But somebody casts a spell that gives the dragon a cold, and suddenly a tiny little virus gets into this dragon, and the dragon's immune system can't handle it, and the dragon dies. Okay, now you got a gigantic carcass to deal with, but at the same time, this ridiculously unstoppable OP character has just been brought to his knees. You've balanced him. You've given the heroes something they can use to defeat the other guy. A good example of characters, or balancing characters that are too OP, again from my own writing, is you look at Land of the Lions, the first book, Lion in the Wind. when they go up against Garmek. Garmek is just pretty much an unstoppable mech warrior. This dude is just really ridiculously OP. And what's interesting is the one of the things that helps the Lions win against him, because it's a 3-on-1 fight, one of the things that helps the Lions win against him is the fact that, he's still a prototype, so they haven't armed him. So that actually saves the Lions, because if he would have been armed, the Lions would have just gotten shredded. It would have just been a brush hogging, one-sided brush hogging, which is how Feral Black wanted him to be. He wanted that all the Garmeks he was going to build, he wanted them to be unstoppable. And the Garmeks that would have been built from this prototype, if the prototype had been finished, would have been unstoppable. But he had, because he was not finished, he had no ammunition. He had some interesting weaknesses, like the tentacles he had on his body. In order to be flexible, they couldn't be armored in a way that would keep them from being damaged. So you gave up some of the protection of those tentacles for the maneuverability and the flexibility and dexterity and stuff that they had. The Lions, their bodies had certain OP abilities, but if you look at them, you could hit them with a certain caliber of rifle, I like 20 millimeter or something like that. Hit them with a 20 millimeter and it would crack their housing and hit their internal electronics and knock them out. Now going back to Garmek, the Lions were able to get in behind him and cut the tentacles, which then caused the hydraulic fluid to leak out, which ruined the tentacles, so Garmek pulls the tentacles off. Now what's interesting is, up until he does this, there is no chinks anywhere in his armor. He is literally unstoppable. That one little Achilles heel, those tentacles, like I say, when they go down, they become a hindrance to him. So he reaches back and pulls them out. Well, when he does that, it creates a chink in his armor. It creates a crack. And the Lions eventually figure out ways to exploit that and expand that. And he's eventually, like Tagani, who's the last one standing, eventually ends up finding a way to peel off his armor plate and get to the guts of the droid. Once he can get to the guts of the droid's done. The droid's just toast at that point. But they have to get to that point, and that's why, if that's ever done as a movie, that is just going to be this huge knockdown drag out. And this is one thing that you can use as a balancing effort, is use your environment, use the terrain. Find ways to weaken that enemy, because that enemy is only unstoppable until you put a crack in their armor, and then they're vulnerable, and then they're stoppable. It might take a while to pry that crack open, but it could be a literal crack, it could be a figurative crack. Like some characters, you could sit there as your character's fighting them. You could have your character taunting them, and they slowly start descending into just mental collapse. And as they descend into mental collapse, they start doing dumb things. And they start becoming more and more vulnerable to your enemy, or to your character, allowing them to overcome them. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a good example of that, because there's plenty of situations in there where you have an unstoppable opponent who, as you use your environment and your area around, or as they use the environment and the area around them, that unstoppable opponent becomes defeatable. So that comes into the whole balancing thing, is, whittling away your enemy's strength to take them from unstoppable to defeatable. Which again, that's a balancing thing. You introduce weaknesses that allows the good guy to overcome the bad guy, or vice versa. If the bad guy needs to be the overcomer for a while, you need to have a way that they can overcome your your hero's strengths. I'm already 30 minutes, man. I'm over here just yakking away and totally lost track of time. Let's see if there's anything else I need to cover, Adnat. No, I think that's the basics right there. But and this is I think really this isn't even touching the whole. Oh, there it goes again. This isn't touching the whole depth of what is in your stories that you should have as far as balancing, your strengths with your weaknesses, and taking your big guys and chiseling them down, taking your little guys, raising them up, creating balances, dichotomies, things like that. I can talk more about this if you guys would like me to in a future video. Just let me know. But anyways, this covers the basics of one of the key elements you need in your writing to create believable characters, believable scenes. In a sense, a kind of a David and Goliath, but from a different angle. Anyways, I'll leave it at that, and I will catch you guys in the next video.